Hey there, and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete, and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Extreme Desert Challenge. Our last episode was quite heavy on the combat. We completed 2 missions and collected enough honor to advance Stake to the rank of Baron, and so we then also began construction of a proper throne room, which you will also see featured in some fan art at the end of the episode. Now, as you can see, that throne room is not yet finished, and we will very likely spend the first couple of days of this episode working on it. Yes, I know, it doesn't look like there is a whole lot left to do, but those marble tiles are expensive. We are, by the way, also already preparing this throne room for when Stake eventually reaches the final royal rank of Count, which does come with a few more requirements on top of those for Baron, and so we are already working those in at this point. And reaching that rank of Count will then likely also be our primary goal after this episode. As you probably know, the Royalty DLC has introduced a unique way of escaping the planet, and reaching that highest rank is one of the requirements for it. Now, as you can see here, our first day progresses in rather uneventful fashion. I have decided to have our colonists turn some of the excess rice into chem fuel. At the moment, we are producing a bit more rice than we are consuming, and chem fuel can be used in a variety of ways, for example in the fabrication of mortar shells, and expanding our mortar setup could definitely also be part of our ongoing efforts to improve our defenses. But more on that in due time. For now we can watch Poleana construct a second drape over here, and with a material requirement of 150 units of leather, cloth or any other fabric, these are definitely not cheap, especially considering that we absolutely want to save our cloth for our defenses, which will inevitably include a hefty amount of sandbags. Still, at this point, everything that is required furniture-wise has been placed inside of our throne room. The only thing left now is to complete the flooring, which again could take some time and is one more reason why we want to save up on cloth, because I would like to keep some carpet in here. However, to meet all the requirements, we can no longer use regular carpet, instead we have to use fine carpet, and just like fine tiles, that is not exactly cheap to make. Nonetheless, we have made it to the end of our first day and can now quickly call a trade caravan. We do have plenty of imperial favor at the moment, and these caravans almost always carry something interesting. A little later then, we finish precision rifling, which means we can now manufacture assault rifles and sniper rifles, and I think the project that we want to continue with is skin hardening. We only recently acquired the tech print for that, but it would allow us to give our frontline fighters a bit of extra protection, and considering that raids are certainly not getting any easier, that might not be such a bad idea. Just as she's going to bed, Redhawk then also experiences a work frenzy. You might remember that Troy also got one last episode, so at least for the first 24 hours here, things are going pretty well. On the next morning then, work inside of the throne room continues, and I have decided to keep the carpet space to a minimum. At the moment, marble for all of those fine tiles is simply a bit easier to come by. Now at this point, we are also informed that our deep drill has run out of resources to mine. But don't worry, the underground deposit here is not yet depleted, it is just a little larger than the drill's operating area. So let's quickly move that drill just a few tiles to a different location, which is by the way a base game feature and not added by the Minify Everything mod. I just wanted to mention that because some of you complained about that in regards to the moisture pump, which I think is fair, but then again the moisture pump is arguably also one of the more frustrating items in the entire game in my opinion. Now, as always, the arrival of the Royal Tribute Collector will be pretty much ignored. All we would have to give at the moment are a few units of gold, and we definitely need those ourselves. Not to mention that our relationship with the Empire is pretty good as it is, so we hardly need to pay for any improvements. Speaking of gold, 50 units of it will now go into Stake's and Redhawk's bedroom, because Stake's new title will also come with a few requirements for this one. Among them is the construction of a royal bed. So let's have him construct that, and its completion already takes us into the late afternoon, at which point Stake's and Redhawk's bedroom does in fact look a little bit more luxurious. That is also pretty much all that happens for the rest of the day. Of course, our flooring efforts in the throne room never really stop, but even over there we are getting closer to the finish line. On the next morning then, we are constructing a few more hydroponics basins now that we have harvested all the psychoid leaves over here. At this point, thanks to Alistair's deep drilling efforts, we definitely have both enough steel and components to afford them. We are also going to shuffle our crops around a bit, since most of them have just been harvested. Yes, this will have a few basins start from scratch, but in the end our little farm will look a bit more symmetrical. In the throne room, meanwhile, we have progressed to the carpeting stage, as we are now going to put down fine burgundy carpet underneath our table. And again, I have chosen a comparatively small area on purpose, as every single tile of this carpet will require 35 units of cloth, so for even this small section we need 700 units. Now at the moment we have only about 400, and that is actually part of the reason we called that trade caravan earlier. Speaking of which, here they are, arriving in the early evening. That means it is now high time for Troy to make as much flake as he can, before we then send Steak out to strike a deal. And this one is actually fairly unremarkable. We are in fact only exchanging flake for cloth, which also has to do with the fact that we are not exactly swimming in silver at the moment, and I think at this point in the game it is smart to have a bit of a reserve. But thanks to that trade, on the following morning then our throne room is finally complete. Or at least it would be if I hadn't put down a line of limestone tiles last episode, and I actually did that on purpose to save up on materials. At this point though, after all of the work that we have put in, I think we can expend a bit more time and resources to make things look nice and uniform. Nonetheless, Steak's Baron ceremony is getting closer, and so we are not only making a beautiful Thrombo fur cape for him now, but we actually also want to quickly shift our research focus onto royal apparel. As a Baron, Steak will want to wear a coronet. A crown would actually be a bit too much at this point, but this project unlocks them both and should be quickly completed. The cape is finished first though, and thanks to Edmo's expertise it is of excellent quality. Stats wise, by the way, it is identical to the duster, which it replaces, so we are not losing anything here in terms of protection. And as Steak's second in command, and the only other member of the Steakhouse with a royal title, Red Hawk can now put on that duster. That way our colony's hierarchy is clearly marked. In the late afternoon then, the research of royal apparel also comes to an end, which means that we can continue our process of unlocking skin hardening, and we can also send Edmo and 50 units of steel over to the smithy, where he will now make Steak some proper royal headwear. And yes, I know the irony of having Edmo do all of these things is certainly not lost on me, but then again he is also continuously delivering good work, so in my opinion it only makes sense to use his services. Steak's coronet, meanwhile, is only of normal quality. Certainly nothing to complain about, and it also won't affect its usefulness at all, but maybe it gives us a bit of a hint that Edmo feels like he's done for now. By the way, yes, we could have also made the coronet out of silver or gold, but as you know, that would have multiplied its material cost by 10, and as much as I think Steak deserves this honor, we also have to be realistic about what we can currently afford. Now, before the big coronation can begin, we are quickly taking care of two more projects here. Number one is the construction of our third and final geothermal generator, which should hopefully give us enough power to last all the way to the end of the series. Project number two is something that I have seen pop up in the comments numerous times now, and it is another flooring job, more specifically sterile tiles in the kitchen. I will admit I have been going back and forth about this one. To be perfectly honest, it is really not entirely necessary. If we simply keep the kitchen clean, then food poisoning will rarely be an issue. But then again, this makes keeping the kitchen clean a little easier, and we no longer have to be quite as meticulous about it. At the end of the day, I'd rather spend my silver on this than a coronet. Being made out of silver, gold or steel, the latter will satisfy Steak's needs either way. And speaking of those needs, I think the time has come. Our throne room now fulfills all the necessary requirements. Steak already has a proper outfit as well, so the only thing missing is the Imperial Bestower. Luckily though, they arrive almost immediately, and so yet another ceremony can begin. And there we are, Steak has now received the title of Baron. Now, as I've said, most of the requirements for this title are already met, but we still need a drape in the bedroom, for example, which we'll get to in just a moment. The most important thing, in my opinion, is that Steak still appears to be rather flexible about his privileges, otherwise he would certainly not be satisfied with eating simple meals, or even with doing jobs like construction. Now, having earned a new title, I think it is only appropriate for Steak to give a lengthy speech here. His new coronet actually improves his chances of succeeding in this, and indeed, in the late afternoon we learned that his words were encouraging and well delivered. A few seconds later, our kitchen is then also completely floored with sterile tiles, and so another day in the desert slowly comes to an end. On the following morning then, you can very clearly see it's construction time. I have already mentioned this in the last episode, but we are essentially going to mirror our defensive setup here, just to give us one more opportunity to perhaps intercept a few enemies before they then continue into the next area, which will consist mostly of turrets. Just for everyone's amusement, let's also quickly marvel at Alistair's mining speed over here. At this point, I am fairly convinced that he could probably mine out every single bit of rock on this map in less than a day. Now, while we're building our defenses here, there is one more thing I want to mention regarding roofs, which are actually no longer a factor when it comes to accuracy. I believe that feature was removed quite a few updates ago. What a roof could affect, however, is walking speed, as that is in fact based on light levels, so we do want to make sure to roof over all those areas where our enemies will be walking, because slowing them down is basically the primary function of this first stage maze here, while our ability to shoot them in the process is certainly nice, don't get me wrong, but it is only of secondary importance. Maybe also on the topic of kill boxes as a whole, I am very much aware of the fact that they are a topic of controversy in the Rimworld community, but I also feel like that on the merciless difficulty there are very few other viable options if you actually want to keep your colony alive, and considering that a good amount of you have actually grown somewhat attached to our protagonists, I think at this point in the series keeping them alive for a little bit longer should take priority. Still, I am somewhat tempted to try my hands at a no killbox challenge, but maybe that could be something for the next series. Now, as you can see, we have sneakily progressed to yet another day. Most of the colony is in fact busy with construction work, only Troy is currently spending his time making kibble. All in all though, things remain fairly uneventful, which is actually making me a little nervous at this point. We haven't had a raid or any other sort of danger in quite some time, and I fear that whatever Randy throws at us next might want to make up for that. Still, I will of course not complain and also not put the steakhouse into any more danger than necessary, which is why we are most certainly not going to accept this quest right here. Having a mech cluster land on the map is already bad enough as it is, and this one here comes with pretty much all possible shenanigans, and I don't think that any of the rewards here are worth that risk. And so instead we simply let another evening roll by, before we then make our little maze a bit more secure on the next morning. I am deliberately not putting down any traps inside of the actual corridors here. Not only would that get pretty expensive pretty fast, but I also think that it's a rather boring way of defending yourself. That area with the doors, however, that is where we ideally do not want any enemies to be, because that is where our colonists will be standing, waiting to shoot at them, and so a few traps in front of those doors will hopefully ensure that our position will not get overrun. Around noon then, we receive the unfortunate news that Alistair has successfully mined out every single unit of steel that was deposited underground here, and so, at least for the time being, our deep drilling efforts will now be put on hold. With over 2,500 units of steel still in storage, I think we can afford to take a short break. Perhaps our scanner finds another underground deposit that is close by in the meantime, otherwise Alistair would have to travel back to the outskirts of the base. While we are still thinking about that, our researchers finished the skin hardening project, so with a slightly invasive procedure we could now give everyone a little bit of extra protection, and extra protection is also what our next project will be focusing on, as we now start looking into recon armor, one of the most lengthy projects that is available to us, but a very important step on our way to be able to craft our own armor suits, and I have a feeling that ability could still play an important role. With our first big cloth harvest coming in, we can now also construct that still missing drape inside of Stakes and Redhawk's bedroom, so just before they go to bed, that room now also fulfills all the necessary requirements. Like I said earlier though, most of that cloth will be used to construct sandbags. A good number of them will be featured in Stage 2 in the area that comes after this, but we can also plop down a few in the corridors here, at least in those that we will not be shooting inside of. As you can already see in Edmo's case here, this will slow our enemies down significantly, and it will hopefully allow us a few extra seconds to get everyone into position. And so, with our first stage of defenses almost finished, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut for today. Yes, I know the episode is a little shorter than usual this time, but most of that had to do with the fact that the steakhouse faced absolutely no threats at all today, which I doubt is going to last for that much longer. Now, before we wrap things up, I promised you guys some fan art, and today we have 2 contributors. The first is Ada Lynn, who on our Discord shared a drawing of Jake getting ready for combat, which I do believe is what Jake is primarily known for at the moment, and he does also have the best armor and arguably best weapon, not to mention that he played a crucial role in that second mission in the last episode. Now, the other bit of fan art comes from Tony Murchison, and calling it a bit is definitely a vast understatement. It is the result of about 20 hours of work creating a render of the steakhouse throne room, and yes, Tony modeled and textured all of this himself. And not only is that in itself an amazing display of passion for the series, but the amount of little details that you can find if you spend just a few minutes looking at these pictures is just on another level. I really hope that YouTube's compression doesn't botch the resolution too badly, but just as an example, try to read what's on the TV if you can. That one is probably my favorite piece in this entire thing. Tony was also kind enough to put all of his work in one central place for you to download, since that question has popped up in the comments from time to time, so that is what the link on screen is for, and you can also find it once more down below. On that page you can, by the way, also donate a small amount to show your appreciation for Tony's work, so if that's something that you would like to do, then I'm sure he would be happy about that. And speaking of things that would make us happy, as we are now wrapping things up for today, I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up on the episode, if you enjoyed it that is, and if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!